Hi everyone. For the second section of Module 12, we're going to talk about statements, conditionals, and biconditionals. And remember, what we're working towards in Module 12 is being able to write a mathematical proof, and this is the next step. So let's start with a conditional statement. A conditional statement is sometimes called an if-then statement. The technical name for it is conditional statement, but what we usually call them is if-then statements because that's how they can be written. They can always be written in that format. If something, then something. And that's what we mean by conditional. The word condition means something has to happen before something else can. So like, you might say to your parents, can I go out with my friends? And they might say, well, yeah, on the condition that your homework is finished. They're saying like, if your homework is finished, then you can go out with your friends. If it's not, you can't. That's an if-then statement. If you finish your homework, then you can go out with your friends. Now you want to be careful because sometimes you can have a conditional statement that's actually not written in if-then form. So let's do this for our first example today. It says write the following conditional statement in if-then form. So I'm telling you in the directions, even though it doesn't say if blank then blank, it is a conditional statement and it can be rewritten that way. So the sentence is, I take my umbrella when it rains. So I want to turn that sentence into if something, then something. Now, one good answer for this. Now, this is one of those things where it's not like there's only one answer to this one. But here's the answer I came up with. I said, if it rains, then I'll take my umbrella. That's basically the same sentence written two different ways. They're both saying the same thing. I take my umbrella when it rains. If it rains, then I take my umbrella. They're both the same statement, and they're both a conditional statement, but the if-then is a little bit more straightforward. The next thing we're going to learn about is a converse. Now, the converse is when you switch the if part with the then part. And I also added a couple vocab words in here for you. When you're talking about a conditional statement, we call the if part the hypothesis and the then part the conclusion. So you might see those words in the book, you might see those words in the homework. Hypothesis means the if part, conclusion means the then part. But yeah, converse is when you switch the if and then, and a converse is not always true. So if you remember the example we did yesterday in 12.1, I said something along the line, this wasn't the exact example we did, but I said something along the lines of, if two angles are vertical angles, then they're congruent. But it doesn't work backwards. If two angles are congruent, they're not automatically vertical angles. And that's an example of how the converse is not always true. So let's take our sentence that we just wrote in the last example. This was our answer. If it rains, then I will take my umbrella. Now the converse is if you take the if part and the then part and you switch them. So what I get is, if I take my umbrella, then it's raining. Now that might be true, but it's not always true. It's not automatically true. And remember when we talked about counterexample yesterday? We said if there's even one example of this thing not being true, then it's not a true statement anymore. So for this one, I said that converse isn't always true. For example, here would be a good counterexample. Maybe I took my umbrella to the beach because I didn't want to get sunburned. Okay, so that means the statement, you remember the converse said, if I take my umbrella, then it's definitely raining outside. And I just gave you an example of when I took my umbrella and it wasn't raining, it was hot out. So you can see that's a counterexample and the converse was not true. So that's an important thing to remember. If you take an if-then statement that is true, and you take its converse by switching the if and the then, it can still be true, but it's not automatically still true. So let's think about one of the examples where they are both true. Let's say and I'll give you an example in just a minute. Let's say I had a statement where I say, if this, then that, and it's true. And then I take the converse. I switch the if and the then. I say, okay, if that, then this. And you say, well, those are both true. That's what we call a biconditional statement. Conditional statement is if then, bi means two. So what you're saying is it's a conditional statement that works two directions. It's two conditional statements combined into one. So that's a biconditional statement. And a lot of times for biconditional statements, we use the words if and only if. And what you do is you get rid of the if and you get rid of the then. You take the two parts of the sentence and you just put if and only if between them. So here's an example of that. Let's say I said, well, let's say we have a test. And I say, if you get at least 90% on this test, then you get an A. All right, that's a true statement. That's usually how I grade my tests. Now let's take that statement's converse. We'll take the getting an A part and the at least 90% part and switch those. Then it says, if you get an A on my test, you got at least 90%. You go, well, that's still true. So this is an example of when a statement and its converse are both true. That means the statement is a biconditional statement, and we can write it this way. You get an A if and only if you get at least 90% on this test. And what you're saying by saying if and only if, you're actually telling the reader this is a biconditional statement. There are two conditional statements and they both work. Getting an A means you got 90%, and getting 90% means you got an A.